the United States military, or you might as well say the Trump administration, releases a video showing what they say is evidence that Iran was responsible for the tanker being hit in the Gulf of Oman. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas, and this is indeed the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you enjoy the content and you find yourself coming back here often, please consider supporting this content through PayPal, Patreon, liking the videos, sharing the videos. Ad apocalypse is a real thing, and they have been going after us, and they've been nuking channels. So between trusting YouTube and between trusting patrons or people who watch the content, I would put my trust in the people who watch the content. So that said, let's get to the news. There's big things afoot. The Trump administration has essentially pointed the finger at Iran and is finally given what they call evidence of this. Take a look at this. And just to catch people up to date. On Wednesday, Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, has a historic trip to Iran to meet with Ayatollah Khomeini and Rouhani, with the notion of bringing down tensions in that region of the world. A day later, almost on cue, there's a Japanese tanker set afire in the Gulf of Oman. Coincidental? Suspicious? Yeah, all those things. Now, the U.S. has been putting pressure on Iran with this pressure campaign. The U.S. unilaterally pulls out the JCPOA. After unilaterally pulling out the JCPOA, all of the countries around the world that were signatories was against us on that policy. Not just that policy, the subsequent policies after that. We're alone. We've ramped up troops in that region of the world, all with this notion of squeezing Iran. Donald Trump appoints a mad dog, John Bolton, who earlier was dancing and screaming on stage that he was going to be singing and dancing in Tehran. Paid handsomely by the MEK religious maniac terrorist group. At least they were terrorists on our watch list. I guess my point is this. This smells. This smells extraordinarily bad. But Pompeo comes out and says they have evidence, they have intelligence, they know it. Interestingly enough, this smells to such a degree that even CNN and even mainstream NPR, look at how mainstream NPR reports this. Without providing evidence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Iran was responsible for explosions on 2 tankers in the Gulf of Oman earlier today. That's astonishing. That's a media organization in the United States that is not being obsequious to the war line. That's amazing. It's almost as if their hatred of Trump is enough to give them just a tiny degree of skepticism that the country that screamed weapons of mass destruction in Iraq ends up with a comically worse version of that first thing. They say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. This is a bad version of a rhyme. This smells. Overtly smells. This is the video that the U.S. puts out. Now, what they're saying is, or the line that they're using, they're saying, we know it was Iran because we have video footage of them pulling off apparently some kind of mortar off the tanker that was unexploded. So think of it as they put mortars on the tankers, it was unexploded, and then they had to retrieve one, and in the process of retrieving one, we got it on video. That's the story. That's what they're going with. This is what this is supposed to be. This grainy footage is what's supposed to be Iran pulling some kind of mortar or some kind of explosive that didn't explode off of the tanker. And this is the evidence. This grainy footage. I have to be honest. They have $1 trillion military budget. I don't know how much they have in the black budget, the amount of money they dump into these black projects and everything else. I could have done this. This looks horrendous. I could have done this. And I don't even know how to use Photoshop. That's how bad this is. This is astonishing. This is astonishing. I sat here And, the basic question that I always ask people to ask is, who profits from this? Who takes advantage of this? And by the way, the captain of the Japanese freighter said that's not what happened. He said there was a missile or projectile that hit the ship. The story of the person that was there, that's an impartial actor in the process, is different than the story of the party that is not an impartial actor in this process. There are several people that have an advantage in this process. Iran is not one of them. There is no advantage at all in this process for Iran to do this, especially since for the last year, they've essentially abided by the terms of an agreement that nobody else was abiding by. But just like Syria, they're bad guys. And because they're bad guys, geopolitical politics doesn't really matter. Self-interest doesn't really matter. None of that stuff matters because they're bad guys. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Ask yourself, who profits? Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of them are going to be willing to fight to the last dead American to get Iran out that region. Not to mention, even the U.S. itself has a dog in the hunt. How can you not believe that the U.S. has a dog in the hunt, seeing the behavior from the day that Trump took office to now? I sat here and I just wrote down, I wanted to know how many false flags could I name? How many things that have been used for pretexts to war? What you're seeing behind you, this image, this is what they used to call yellow journalism. Propaganda, these big headlines, essentially clickbait before clickbait. The journalists, or you could say the editors at the time, bragged that they were in some part responsible for the start of the Spanish-American War. Headlines like this fear that Spain may declare war because they were blaming Spain for sinking the Maine. Did they know that? No, they didn't know that. Did it stop them from blaming them? No, it didn't stop them from blaming them because it sold newspapers. It was sensational. War, death, the U.S. against some kind of adversary. It sold papers just like it sells papers today. Big, bold headlines. Did it matter that it was false? No. Did it matter in real world terms for the people who had to fight that war? Yes. Did it matter for the people in those territories? Yes. Did it matter from the standpoint of geopolitical politics between the United States and Spain? Yes. But from the standpoint of selling the papers and putting the narrative out and getting the public behind that war, no, it didn't matter one iota. Has it changed all that much? Were there weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? I just sat there and wrote down what I could think of from the top of my head. Spanish-American War was the first one. Yellow journalism. Gulf of Tonkin. The Vietnam War. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Gaddafi is going to slaughter his population. So we need to use our humanitarian bombs that are magic because those humanitarian bombs somehow avoid real human beings that are innocent in this process. Oh, I'm sorry, that doesn't happen. They're selling slaves in Libya from the bombs that NATO, led by the United States, pushed by people like Hillary Clinton, was dropping. Do you honestly believe that your bomb is somehow better than the knife that the guy is going to use? I guarantee you it is not. It decapitates. Far easier. The CIA suggests the fake or actual bombing of Cubans to get the pretext to get involved in Cuba. That was one of those things that was released a few years ago. That they were thinking of either simulated or a real bombing of a boat filled with Cubans in order to get the United States ginned up for a war. Fact of the matter is, if anybody would have questioned this, they would have called them a conspiracy theorist. But this is indeed what they were talking about. Ripping babies from incubators. That was the Iraq one. That was when the woman went to Congress who was a fraud and started screaming that Saddam Hussein was ripping babies from incubators. That one is special. That one is extraordinarily ironic. Even dramatically so. Because Bill Clinton and the sanctions that Bill Clinton had imposed on Iraq had killed 500,000 children, babies. Part of their issue was that because of the sanctions, they couldn't get certain drugs and medications. So the only thing that they had was oil. So many of the things they tried to reproduce with kind of with the chemicals that they had at their disposal. So the hospitals had a certain smell to it and those type of things. 500,000 babies died as a result of the sanctions that Bill Clinton put on Saddam Hussein. So it's pretty special that they're screaming that he's ripping babies from incubators. I guarantee you, there's never, even if it was true, it would never match the number of babies that was killed under Bill Clinton. Astonishing. OPCW report leaked showing that some of the bombing sites were staged. Oh, that's a special one. That was recent. Go further. Them using and saying that a chemical strike that they couldn't prove, that they were using social media to justify, and mainstream media ran with it. And when you ask, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. He's won back 90-something% of his territory. What excuse, what reason would he have to do this? And they say, collectively, he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. Bad guys don't care about geopolitical politics. Bad guys don't care about maintaining their particular authority. Even though he hung to that place like grim death, bad guys apparently lack common sense than best interest. The chemical weapons strike, social media. Yeah, I guess my point is this. Why on earth, with the track record that you could just list off the top of your head, and I'm pretty sure there's people who was probably screaming at the television, or more, why would you automatically just believe this particular administration? Mike Pompeo screamed on the stage that he lied, stole, and cheated for a living and even taught courses on it. Are you really going to believe that guy that went on stage and would admit such a thing? This administration has had a very specific goal in mind. I don't think Trump necessarily wanted to go to war per se, but I did think that it didn't really matter what Trump wanted. The moment that Trump allowed that mad dog into the process, he was going to drag him closer and closer and closer. Something was going to take place, and golly gee, the president has to act. Trump doesn't have a choice in the matter, just like he didn't have a choice in the matter in Syria. Trump says, I want to bring troops home, chemical weapons strike, on cue. On cue. And now he says he wants to talk to the leaders of Iran. And what do you know? What do you know? Just golly gee, just so happens. Burning tanker in the Gulf. What do you know? I'm sure all of this is above board. All of this is totally above board. Be skeptical. Be skeptical. You lived through this once. This was only a few years ago. You're still within the wars that the last Republican president filled with a cast of swamp monsters, or some of the same swamp monsters, one of which was even attacking the International Criminal Court, because that court would have been coming after him, which should give you pause about the individuals that are leading you in this process. One guy screaming that he lies for a living. The other guy is trying to stop the International Criminal Court because he knows they'll come after him for the war crimes that was committed at the war that he was one of these main purveyors of. Not to mention, look at our allies. One ally just beheaded 30-something people and apparently trying to crucify another one. Some of those people were kids, and some of the offenses deal with social media. And the other one is essentially an apartheid state. Don't take my word for it. They call themselves a Jewish state. That's literally, it would be like if you said, we're a white state. Oh, that makes you cringe a little bit when you say that because it gives you this notion of South Africa. Yeah, it should make you cringe. Those are our allies. Those are our only allies. I'll leave this here. I'm not going to be skeptical. The U.S. is saying they have footage, and that dodgy footage is what they're using as evidence. Only thing you have to do is take their word for it, right? The foreign minister of Iran, I think, nails it for most of the world at this point. Reported attacks on Japan-related tankers occurred while PM Shabe was in a meeting with Ayatollah Khomeini for extensive and friendly talks. Suspicious doesn't begin to describe what likely transcribed this morning. Indeed. Is it possible that Iran decided, I'm just going to bomb that Japanese tanker to stick my thumb in the eye of who? He's not at war with Japan. He's not at conflict with Japan. Who is he sticking his finger in the eye of? You believe that him doing this, that perspective makes no sense. The perspective only makes sense if Iran is being a troll and is in some odd way wanting to test whether or not the lunatics that are at the helm, some of which were at the helm when they went through Iraq, and absolutely wants to take down Iran. That would just seem utterly bizarre to me. It would seem utterly bizarre. I would say use your thinking faculties on this and ask yourself who profits. Ask yourself who profits. I'll leave this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Be very careful with this. The question becomes, where does Trump go? You've hit him with all the sanctions. You pull out of the JCPOA. They're not going to talk to you. They said they're not going to talk to you. They can't talk to you. They have no choice but not to talk to you because of their political situation. Not to mention you've humiliated I guess you could say the moderates of the party, meaning the hardliners gets more carte blanche because of the humiliation to the moderates. You have nowhere to go from the standpoint of politics because they can't give you leeway from where you started from. So now what do? Now you're accusing them of bombing a ship. And Mike Pompeo has given a list of their apparently offenses. So now where do you go? You've done with the sanctions. Where do you go? This is the part that I am curious on. I am absolutely curious, and I've been glued to media waiting for that particular point. That's the thing I want to hear. Now what? It's the question that I have all these Democrats who are screaming that Russian did. So it's like, okay, now what are you going to do? Now what are you going to do? I don't believe this for a minute. Neither should you. I'll leave this here. Thanks all.